The sun blazed crimson against the rugged horizon of West Texas, casting long shadows across the dusty streets of San Elizario. As Wyatt Keller urged his weary horse toward the only watering hole for 20 miles. Blood seeped through the makeshift bandage on his shoulder, a painful reminder of the life he'd left behind, a life stained with gunpowder and regret. San Elizario in 1878 was a town caught between worlds, part Mexican, part American, wholly wild. The settlement along the Rio Grande had weathered Apache raids, cavalry incursions, and the harsh desert elements, yet somehow maintained its stubborn existence through it all. For Wyatt, it represented something he'd been searching for: anonymity. He dismounted outside Valdez's saloon, wincing as his boots hit the ground. At 32, Wyatt was neither young nor old, but the years had weathered him beyond his age. His dark hair hung long beneath his wide-brimmed hat, and a beard grown more from neglect than intention concealed the lower half of his face. Only his eyes, a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin, hinted at the man he'd been before. "Room's $2 a night," said the barkeep, a heavy-set Mexican man with an impressive mustache. "Extra dollar if you want the linens changed." Wyatt dropped $3 silver on the counter. "How much for no questions?" The barkeep pocketed the money with a knowing nod. "For you, amigo. Questions cost extra." Wyatt's room was sparse: a bed, a rickety chair, and a small window that faced west across the endless Texas landscape. After cleaning and rebandaging his wound, he sank onto the bed, but sleep refused to come. As the day faded, he found himself drawn to the small ridge just outside of town. The ridge wasn't much, just a slight elevation that afforded a view of the surrounding desert and the distant mountains beyond. But it offered what Wyatt craved most: solitude and the most magnificent sunsets he'd ever witnessed. He settled on a large flat rock, tipped his hat back, and let the spectacle wash over him. That first night established a ritual. Each evening, as the town settled into its nightly routines, Wyatt would climb the ridge, sit on that same rock, and watch the sun disappear behind the distant mountains. In those moments, he found a quiet peace that had eluded him for years. Days turned to weeks. Wyatt took odd jobs around town, mending fences, breaking horses for the local ranchers, anything that paid and didn't require too many questions. The townsfolk regarded him with cautious acceptance. He wasn't the first man with shadows in his eyes to pass through San Elizario, and he certainly wouldn't be the last. "You got a story, mister," stated Santiago, the blacksmith's son, as Wyatt helped shoe a particularly ornery mare. "My papa says a man who watches sunsets alone is either a poet or running from something." Wyatt tightened the last shoe. "Your papa's a wise man. So which are you, poet or fugitive?" Wyatt almost smiled. "Maybe a bit of both." The truth was more complicated. 4 months earlier, Wyatt had been riding with the Wallace gang not by choice, but by circumstance. After the war, jobs were scarce, and his skills with horses and guns made him valuable to men like Eli Wallace. But when Wallace decided to rob a train carrying a payroll and a car full of passengers, including women and children, Wyatt had drawn his line. The confrontation had left 3 of Wallace's men dead, Wallace himself wounded and vengeful, and Wyatt with a bullet through his shoulder and a price on his head. He'd been running ever since, haunted by the knowledge that Wallace wasn't a man who forgave betrayal. One evening in late September, Wyatt's ritual was interrupted. He just settled onto his rock, the familiar weight of his Colt revolver against his hip, when he heard footsteps approaching. His hand instinctively moved toward his gun. "This view belongs to everyone, I reckon." The voice stopped him, soft, feminine, with a slight accent he couldn't place. Wyatt turned to find a woman standing a few paces away. She was tall for a woman, with rich auburn hair pulled back from her face. Her dress was simple but well made, and there was an intelligence in her hazel eyes that caught him off guard. Without waiting for an invitation, she sat beside him on the rock. Not too close, a respectable distance, but close enough that he caught the faint scent of lavender. They sat in silence as the sun performed its nightly spectacle, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples before finally slipping below the horizon. Only when the first stars appeared did the woman stand. "Good night," she said simply, and then she was gone, walking back toward town with purposeful strides. Wyatt watched her go, perplexed and, despite himself, intrigued. The next evening she returned. Again, she sat without invitation or introduction. Again, they watched the sunset in companionable silence. And again, she left with a simple good night once the show was over. On the third night, Wyatt's curiosity got the better of him. "You have a name?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. She looked at him, a hint of amusement in her eyes. Felicity Novak. Wyatt Keller," she nodded, as if confirming something she already knew. "The horse tamer. That what they are calling me, among other things." Her gaze returned to the sunset. "Some say you're running from the law," Wyatt stiffened. "And what do you say, Miss Novak?" "I say a man's past is his own business," she paused. "Unless it threatens my town." "Your town? I teach at the school." She gestured toward the settlement below. "Those children are my responsibility." Wyatt studied her profile against the dying light. She couldn't have been more than 25, but there was a steadiness to her that spoke of someone who had weathered storms. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said finally. "I believe you." She stood, brushing dust from her skirt. "Good night, Mr. Keller." This time, Wyatt found himself watching her retreating figure with more than just curiosity. The pattern continued. Each evening, Felicity would join him on the ridge. Their conversations began as brief exchanges but gradually lengthened. He learned she had come to San Elizario 2 years earlier from Boston, seeking adventure and purpose after losing her parents to influenza. She had found both in the one-room schoolhouse where she taught the children of ranchers, merchants, and laborers alike. "They didn't want a woman teacher at first," she told him one evening, "especially one from back east, but when the last schoolmaster left for El Paso, they didn't have much choice. And now," a small smile played at her lips, "now they bring me pies and make sure their children mind their manners in my classroom." Wyatt found himself looking forward to these conversations, to the way her face lit up when she spoke of her students, to the gentle humor that often colored her observations about life in San Elizario. She never pressed him about his past, and for that he was grateful. October brought cooler evenings. One night, Felicity arrived with a woolen shawl wrapped around her shoulders and a small basket in her hands. "I brought supper," she announced, settling beside him. "Mrs. Ortega's tortillas and some of my own attempt at beans." Wyatt accepted the food with thanks, suddenly aware of how long it had been since he'd shared a meal with anyone. "This is mighty good," he said after tasting her beans. Felicity looked pleased. "My cooking skills are still a work in progress. In Boston, we had a housekeeper who took care of such things." "How'd you end up here? Seems a far cry from Boston society." She gazed out at the landscape, now bathed in the soft gold of evening. "After my parents died, the house felt empty, smothering. I saw an advertisement for teachers needed out west. It promised adventure, purpose." She smiled ruefully. "It didn't mention scorpions in my boots or dust storms that turn everything gray for days. Do you regret it?" "Not for a moment." Her answer was immediate, certain. "Life here is hard, but it's real. I'm doing something that matters." As they ate, a comfortable silence fell between them. When they finished, Wyatt found himself reluctant for the evening to end. "Tell me about one of your students," he prompted. Her face brightened. "Well, there's Miguel. 8 years old and absolutely determined to build a flying machine like the one he saw in a picture book." As she spoke, Wyatt realized he was actually smiling for the first time in longer than he could remember. The next morning, Wyatt was breaking a spirited Mustang for Hector Diaz when he noticed a commotion near the schoolhouse. Without thinking, he secured the horse and strode across the street. A crowd had gathered, and at its center stood Felicity, her posture rigid as she faced a man Wyatt didn't recognize. "I don't care what fancy education you have, Miss Novak. My boy ain't learning from no book that says the earth is thousands of years old. Bible says different." "Mr. Parker, I understand your concerns, but scientific discoveries ain't no science that trumps the good book." The man, red-faced and burly, jabbed a finger toward her. "Either you stop filling these kids' heads with that nonsense, or I'll see to it the town council finds a proper teacher." Wyatt stepped forward, positioning himself beside Felicity. "Seems to me the lady's just doing her job." Parker's gaze shifted to Wyatt, narrowing. "This ain't your business, stranger." "Maybe not." Wyatt's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. "But I reckon in a town that values education enough to hire a teacher from Boston, folks might appreciate hearing all sides of an issue before making up their minds." A murmur ran through the gathered crowd. Parker looked around, perhaps gauging his support, then spat in the dust. "This ain't over," he growled before stalking away. As the crowd dispersed, Felicity turned to Wyatt. "Thank you, but I could have handled Parker." "No doubt," Wyatt agreed, "but sometimes it helps to have someone standing beside you." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, I suppose it does." That evening on the ridge, Felicity was quieter than usual. "Parker giving you more trouble?" Wyatt asked. She shook her head. "No, but it's not just Parker. Some of the parents." She sighed. "They want their children educated, but only on their terms. They don't understand that knowledge isn't something you can pick and choose like items at a general store. People fear what challenges their beliefs." "Speaking from experience, Mr. Keller," he looked at her, surprised by the directness of her question. "Maybe. Had some beliefs of my own challenged recently." "Such as?" Wyatt hesitated, then decided on a partial truth. "That there's only one path a man can walk once he's started down it." She considered this. "And now I'm not so sure." The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but Wyatt felt something had changed between them. A door had opened, just slightly. November arrived with a bitter cold front. The evening ritual continued, though now both wrapped in heavy coats, their breath forming clouds in the chilly air. One particularly cold evening, Felicity arrived with a flask. "Coffee," she explained, pouring some into the cup portion of the flask, "with a splash of whiskey for warmth." Wyatt accepted it gratefully, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The touch, brief as it was, sent an unexpected warmth through him. "You never speak of family," Felicity observed as they passed the coffee back and forth. "Do you have any?" Wyatt stared into the distance. "Had a brother, lost him at Gettysburg. I'm sorry, long time ago now." But the pain in his voice suggested otherwise. "And your parents?" "Pa died when I was young. Ma raised us on a small ranch in Colorado until she passed when I was 17. Thomas, my brother, and I tried to keep the place going, but then the war came." He took another sip of coffee. "After Gettysburg, there wasn't much reason to go back." Felicity's hand found his in the growing darkness. "Thank you for telling me." They sat like that, hands linked, until the stars emerged in full force above them. The next day, trouble arrived in San Elizario. Wyatt was at the livery stable when he heard the commotion. 3 riders had entered town, rough-looking men with the hard eyes of those who lived beyond the law. They dismounted outside the saloon, and something in their manner set off warning bells in Wyatt's mind. He made his way closer, careful to remain inconspicuous. Through the saloon's grimy window, he could see the men questioning the barkeep, who shook his head repeatedly. One of the men slammed his fist on the counter, and even from outside, Wyatt caught the name that made his blood run cold: Wallace. Wallace had found him. Wyatt retreated to his room, mind racing. He needed to leave immediately. But even as he gathered his few possessions, a thought stopped him: Felicity. The ridge, sunset. She would be waiting, and if Wallace's men were watching, they might see her. They might use her. He couldn't risk it. As the sun began its descent, Wyatt made his way cautiously to the ridge, staying out of sight as much as possible. Felicity was already there, her face lighting up when she saw him approach. "I was beginning to think you might not come," she said. "Felicity, listen to me." He kept his voice low, urgent. "There are men in town looking for me, dangerous men. I have to leave." Her smile faded. "What kind of men? What have you done, Wyatt?" "Nothing I'm ashamed of," he answered truthfully. "But I crossed someone powerful, someone who doesn't forgive. I need to go before they realize I'm here." She searched his face, looking for what, he wasn't sure. "When? Tonight? Now? Just like that?" A hint of anger colored her voice. "After all these weeks, you're just going to disappear." "I don't have a choice." "There's always a choice, Wyatt." She stood, wrapping her shawl tighter around herself. "But I understand. Safe travels, Mr. Keller." She turned to go, but Wyatt caught her arm. "Felicity, wait. Come with me." The words surprised them both. For a moment, she looked as though she might actually consider it, but then she gently pulled away. "My life is here, my students, my purpose." Her eyes were sad but resolute. "And yours?" "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know it could include you if you wanted it to." "Ask me again sometime," she said softly. "When you're not running." With that, she walked away, leaving Wyatt alone on the ridge with the fading light and an ache in his chest he couldn't ignore. That night, Wyatt saddled his horse under cover of darkness. As he led the animal quietly through the back streets of San Elizario, a voice called out to him. Leaving without saying goodbye, Sheriff Rodriguez stepped out of the shadows, his badge catching the moonlight. "It's better this way," Wyatt replied, tensing. "For who?" The sheriff studied him. "Those men asking about you, they claim you're a thief and a murderer. And you believe them." "I believe a man has a right to tell his own story." Rodriguez leaned against a hitching post. "So tell me, Wyatt Keller, are you running because you're guilty or because you're not?" Wyatt hesitated, then decided on the truth. "I rode with Wallace for a time. When he planned to rob a train with passengers, women and children, I objected. Things got violent. You turned on your own gang. They weren't my gang. I was just trying to survive." Wyatt adjusted his saddle. "Wallace doesn't see it that way. He wants revenge." Rodriguez was silent for a long moment. "Those men left town an hour ago, headed east." Wyatt frowned. "East? That doesn't make sense. They should be," understanding dawned. "They found someone who recognized me. They're setting up an ambush on the eastern trail." "Most likely." The sheriff straightened. "Which means you'd be safer heading west, or staying put until they're gone for good." Rodriguez smiled slightly. "That would be my recommendation, though I can't officially advise a wanted man." "Am I?" "Wanted by the law, I mean." "Not in my jurisdiction, and if Wallace is who you say he is, I suspect your story would find sympathetic ears with the Rangers." He stepped back. "Just something to consider." As the sheriff walked away, Wyatt stood in indecision. Staying meant risk, but leaving meant. He thought of Felicity, of their evenings on the ridge, of the unspoken thing growing between them. For the first time in years, He wanted something more than just survival. With a heavy sigh, Wyatt led his horse back to the stable. The next morning, Wyatt sought out Sheriff Rodriguez. "I need to end this," he said. "Wallace won't stop looking for me." "What do you propose?" said a trap. "Let Wallace think I've been spotted. When he comes, be ready." Rodriguez considered this. Dangerous plan for everyone involved. More dangerous to let him hunt me forever. "And if we succeed, you'll have captured one of the most wanted men in the territory." The sheriff couldn't argue with that logic. Together, they formulated a plan. Word would be sent to a neighboring town that a man matching Wyatt's description had been seen. If Wallace took the bait, they would be waiting. What Wyatt didn't expect was Felicity's reaction when he informed her of his plan. "You're using yourself as bait," she exclaimed, her face pale with anger and fear. "That's not brave, Wyatt, it's foolhardy." They stood in the small schoolhouse after the children had gone home, the afternoon sun slanting through the windows. "It's the only way to end this," he insisted. "I can't keep running forever. There are other options. The Rangers could take months to track Wallace down if they ever do. And in the meantime, I'd be looking over my shoulder every day." He stepped closer. "I don't want to live like that anymore, Felicity. I want—" "What?" she pressed when he faltered. "What do you want, Wyatt? A life here, with you if you'll have me." The words hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Felicity's expression softened. "You are the most infuriating man I've ever met," she whispered, but there was no heat in her words. "If you get yourself killed, I'll never forgive you. Is that a yes?" "It's a don't die and then we'll talk." It was enough for now. The trap was set. Word was sent that Wyatt Keller had been spotted in a small trading post 20 miles west of San Elizario. Sheriff Rodriguez positioned volunteers from town, who'd grown fond of the quiet horse tamer at strategic points around the location. Wyatt would appear to be alone, making camp by a distinctive rock formation visible from the main trail. The waiting was the hardest part. 3 days passed with no sign of Wallace or his men. Wyatt began to wonder if they'd taken the bait at all. On the 4th day, as dusk approached, a rider appeared on the horizon. Then another. And a third. Through his spyglass, Wyatt recognized Lee Wallace leading the group, a tall man with a cruel face and a distinctive scar running from his left eye to his jaw. "Here we go," Wyatt murmured, signaling to the hidden men. The confrontation, when it came, was both more and less dramatic than Wyatt had anticipated. Wallace approached confidently, clearly believing he had the upper hand. "Keller," he called out, his voice carrying across the open ground. "Been a long time." Wyatt stood, making no move toward his gun. "Not long enough, Illy. You cost me good men and a mighty fine payday." Wallace's hand hovered near his pistol. "Time to settle up." "You are going to rob women and children," Wyatt replied evenly. "Some lines shouldn't be crossed." Wallace laughed, a harsh sound. "Always were soft, that's why you never really fit with us." His expression hardened. "But betrayal, that demands payment in blood. Not today, Illy." At Wyatt's signal, Sheriff Rodriguez and the volunteers emerged from their hiding places, rifles trained on Wallace and his men. "Illy Wallace," the sheriff announced. "You're under arrest for robbery, murder, and various other crimes the Rangers will be happy to list for you." For a tense moment, it seemed Wallace might choose to fight despite the odds. His hand inched closer to his gun. But one of his men, seeing the futility of their situation, raised his hands in surrender. "Don't be stupid, Illy," the man muttered. "We're outnumbered." Wallace's face contorted with rage, but eventually he too raised his hands. As Rodriguez and his men disarmed and bound the outlaws, Wallace fixed Wyatt with a venomous glare. "This ain't over, Keller." "Yes," Wyatt replied calmly, "it is." The prisoners were transported to El Paso, where the Texas Rangers took custody of them. With evidence provided by Wyatt about Wallace's numerous crimes, there was little chance the outlaw would see freedom again. Upon their return to San Elizario, Wyatt was surprised to find himself greeted as something of a hero. The townspeople, who had always maintained a polite distance, now welcomed him warmly. Sheriff Rodriguez even offered him a position as deputy, which Wyatt promised to consider. But there was only one person whose opinion truly mattered to him. He found Felicity on their ridge, watching the sunset. Without a word, he sat beside her, closer than ever before. "I heard what happened," she said after a moment. "The whole town's talking about it. And what do you think?" She turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I think you're either the bravest or the most foolish man I've ever known, possibly both." "I had something worth fighting for." Her hand found his, fingers intertwining. "So what happens now?" "Now," Wyatt said, drawing her closer, "I stop running. I build something here, a life, a future." He hesitated, then continued, his voice low with emotion. "With you, if you'll have me." "Wyatt Keller," Felicity whispered, "are you proposing to me? Inelegantly, perhaps, but yes, I believe I am." Her answer came not in words, but in the gentle press of her lips against his. A kiss that spoke of beginnings and promise, and a love neither had expected to find. As the last rays of sun dipped below the horizon, they remained on the ridge, planning their future together in the town that had offered them both a second chance. Spring arrived in San Elizario, painting the desert with unexpected bursts of wildflowers. The small church at the edge of town was filled to capacity, as Deputy Wyatt Keller waited at the altar for his bride. When Felicity appeared in a simple white gown, a crown of desert blooms in her hair, the gathered townspeople agreed they'd never seen a more beautiful sight or a man look at a woman with such undisguised adoration. They built their home on a small piece of land just outside of town, with a clear view of the ridge where their story had begun. Wyatt continued as Rodriguez's deputy while also breeding and training horses, his reputation for fairness and skill drawing customers from as far as Santa Fe. Felicity remained the town's schoolteacher, though she took on an assistant as the school grew. In the evenings, they still climbed the ridge to watch the sunset, sometimes alone, sometimes with the children who eventually joined their family, first Robert, with his father's blue eyes and his mother's thoughtful nature, then twins Emma and James, who brought equal measures of joy and mischief to the Keller household. And on special nights, when the stars seemed particularly bright, Wyatt would remind his wife of that first evening when she'd sat beside him without a word and changed the course of his life forever. "Best decision I ever made," Felicity would say, leaning into his embrace. "No," Wyatt would correct her, pressing a kiss to her temple. "The best decision was mine to stay and fight for what matters." Together they'd watch the sun sink below the horizon, no longer alone, but bound by a love that had begun in silence on a ridge overlooking the wild, beautiful landscape they now called home.